Welcome to the home of my brand new studio. It's Talking Time with Caffeine. I'm Today 938, and my guest, you might have met him last year. We talked about the War of the Roses, but today we're going to talk about the prequel. And introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm the Venerable Bede. Yeah, I like English history. It's my favorite history, and I have a bone to pick with people who think Edward III is one of the greatest monarchs in English history. But yeah,
Yeah, I think I mentioned in the last episode, but you're named after a famous writer or poet from the early
yeah.
England's history.
So, um, in the 8th century, I'm pretty sure there was a dude who wrote the first ever history book for what will later be the English people, the Anglo-Saxons, the ecclesiastical history of the English people. Um, I'm named after him, the Venerable Bede. Uh, yeah, he was from Northumbria. I don't know how to, in the north, essentially the northeast by Scotland. He did not like Mercians or Welsh people.
What about the Saxon people?
Uh, I mean, he didn't have a big hate for them because they weren't really on his border.
Okay, because they were more
Um,
down south,
yeah,
Wessex, Wessex and Essex or Essex or
Essex.
I can pronounce
Yeah,
this. I can pronounce it as Wessex. That's where
yeah,
Alfred came from.
yeah. You've got Wessex, Essex, Middlesex, and those are the traditionally Saxon kingdoms. I mean, it's most definitely more complicated than that,
Yeah.
but uh, Bede is from the Anglian area.
Ah.
Uh, so he'd be dealing with angles as he would see them, and was an angle.
But this guy was more of a more in this. He is more Norman French.
Yeah, Edward the Third. He was part of the Angevins, well, the Plantagenets, who were descended not only from the Normans but also earlier lords of Anjou, which is in France, just to the south of Normandy.
Yeah. Yeah, they had a little big. After a while, they got pretty much big, little big empire down there.
Yeah, they
Which
did.
which we might.
Henry the Second. Yeah,
Yeah, we'll
Henry
probably
the
talk about this.
Second.
Yeah, if we ever go in more depth with the 100-Year War in the future, we could have that how they all got together. How maybe we could talk about how the pieces all came together and then all fell apart again. Went back
Yeah,
to.
well, actually, they held more land in France. Oh, okay, never mind. Well, they did of earlier hold a lot of land in France, in the 12th century as well.
Yeah.
But the Hundred Years' War is sort of caused by that dynamic of monarchs having to also be subject to another monarch.
Yeah, I think after that, Brit after that, I think after this, the British probably were less focused on the European holdings and then more of the empires like America, India, and Australia and stuff later on after they lost all the
Uh,
European stuff.
they were actually extremely invested in Europe as well. Mostly, their main thing is don't let one power control Europe, because if they do, they'll
Yeah.
attack us. So what they would do is usually try to maintain the status quo in powers, and this would eventually lead to World War I. But yeah,
Uh,
and they kept Calais up until Queen Mary the First, which is
oh,
definitely a
that would
couple
be
of
Henry the Seventh's first daughter, right?
Henry the Eighth's
Oh,
first
right.
daughter. Yeah, It's okay. There's like a million of them.
Henry VII's granddaughter.
Yes, Henry VII's granddaughter. All right, so do we want to start up this presentation?
Yep, sure. Right. Okay, so here's the title screen, everybody.
Yep, Edward III. We're going to be talking about him kind of surface level, but more in depth than you'd probably get from a history of England.
This is probably. Do you think this is an accurate painting of him?
No, this I think was painted in the 16th century.
Oh, like way after his time.
Yeah, Edward is 14th century.
Okay.
And he'll actually have to deal with the Black Death later on. So.
Right.
So to set up what's going to be going on in his rule, we have to set up the governmental system of England, and this is feudalism. You should probably know what feudalism is. You have your monarch. He gives land to loyal subjects who then have people underneath them, and it's kind of a military caste system. Okay, the early monarchs. In 1066, of course, William the Conqueror comes across the channel and conquers England. And from then on, he uses the Norman kings. There were only 3 Norman kings, technically. They were
William the First, William the Second, and Henry the First.
Yeah. They used their military might, their ability to.
I guess Steve. Would Stephen count as one or not? Or was he technically his mother came through his mother's side? I guess.
It came through. It came through his mom. He was a grandson. So he's kind of he's harder to place, but Blois is.
That was his father's name, but
yeah, he's.
I don't think people ever count the House of Blois very well. It goes from Norman to the Angevins, really.
Yeah, well, that ultimately comes up from your first major issue with the English feudal system under William the First, William the Second, and Henry the First. They were almost constantly at war, and they were able to hold down the feudal lords mostly by going to war. In France, constantly trying to ensure. William the First actually went to war for William the Second. He was the second son of William the First. So, but he was given England, and his elder brother, Robert Curthose, was given Normandy. So they would fight over who was going to be Duke of Normandy and King of England. But Henry the First, who was their youngest brother, would eventually most likely kill Henry the First. Most likely killed William the Second, allegedly, and then took the throne. But Henry the First had a son, but his son would die after a successful campaign. They were coming back to England from Normandy, and I think it's called the White Ship disaster.
Oh, you said Henry the First. You mean?
Yeah, Henry the First's son.
Yeah.
The White Ship disaster leads to a succession crisis. Henry the First does not have a son.
He has a daughter.
But he has a daughter, Empress Matilda.
I guess back then that people weren't so iffy about female rulers.
Yeah, and especially in England, where at first William the Conqueror set up England in a way that no one man could become more powerful than the king, but if all of the nobles came together, they would essentially be more powerful than the king. So you'd have to ensure that not only were you popular, but you were strong and could show that strength. And women can't, in this society, in this feudal medieval society show
Yeah.
strength like a man could, even though she at one point was married to the Holy Roman Emperor. I forget
Yeah. Wasn't really
which one.
until we talk about Mary the First, that the first female ruler in England, at least.
Yeah, and even she had a tough time. That whole thing is more cemented by Elizabeth, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, she
So
also had the time of being opposite, like of being the opposite religious as most of the community too.
yeah, well,
Kind of.
it's complicated.
Yeah. Like I said, that's another topic. We're getting
Yeah.
we're getting like a few generations away right now.
Yeah, so now Henry the First is in a tough spot. He gives the aristocracy, known as the barons,
Yes,
uh,
that's another thing. Like back when the Wessex kings were on the thing, the Wessex were aboard. I think the king divided the land between the earls. Now the titles are barons now.
ealdormen. Yeah,
Oh, not earls.
you did have earls during
Oh,
this period as well. Earl, the original Anglo-Saxon word was ealdorman,
okay.
but you do have the invention of the word, not world, earl, uh, in response to the uh, Scandinavian term jarl. They kind of mix together, and you
Like
do get you.
like when
Yeah,
like
you
the Vikings were charged like Canute and Hardelfoot, and I can't pronounce those names. Hardicut.
Hardakanut. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
those.
come in and they the Danelaw. On this map, you can kind of see it. It's up in the west, opposite from the red stuff on the map. That was called the Danelaw. But yeah, um, Henry the First, in order to get the nobles to accept his daughter, essentially, he gives the barons some amount of promises on how he's going to conduct himself as king. So this is your first sort of
Beginning of
promise that
beginning of the beginnings of the parliament in the future.
no,
Okay.
parliament's a little bit later, but the barons are starting to see that if they work together, they can leverage power against weak or unpopular monarchs, and that will be important a couple of generations later. Yeah, you have the anarchy, but that eventually ends. The anarchy, Stephen of Blois fights Matilda nearly his entire reign, which I think was like 1235 to 1254, somewhere around there. It was a long period of time. So now you actually have
What?
extremely powerful barons.
Who'd you say was that time frame?
Stephen of Blois
Oh,
and
I
Matilda.
think it's more of 11.
Yeah,
11,
11. Yeah, 11.
because
1135
William was the
to
1066. So
1154. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
that's what I'm here
Um
for. Wait a minute.
yeah. This eventually leads to the Angevin dynasty, or the Plantagenets. It in the earlier period they're called the Angevins because they are descended from Geoffroy Plantagenet, who was Count of Anjou, and they eventually they actually Henry II, the son of Matilda, becomes essentially he controls more of France than the King of France.
But
But
yeah. Also, before you go on, I also heard that one of the reasons this book I read, the book might be wrong though, that one of the reasons that the barons kind of supported Stephen more than Matilda was because the Normans and the Angevins were kind of like didn't get along very well down there.
um yeah, that could be part of it. I don't know if she was actually married to Joffrey at first. I think that happens later. I'm
Uh,
not sure on when that happens, but I think it was more Stephen just was in England at
Yeah, he was
Stephen
there.
was yeah, he was in England at the time. He was a man and he was able to seize the treasury and
Like Henry the First did when William the Second died. I mean
well
Henry the First did.
and yeah, William II. Yeah. Exactly like that. He was like, "Oh, okay." Um where was I? Oh no.
Oh, also
Henry the
also
Second. Oh,
sorry, I keep things to talk about, but if no one knows this, uh, like feudalism, it's like you have say you have a lot of land, right? And you chuck it in the four pieces and say, okay, you can have you can have this piece, this piece, this piece, and this piece of land. You four of them I divide among you four. As long as you're still loyal to me and your soldiers fight for me, then you can own this land, but technically I own it still. But and then
yeah.
later on they're like, hey, let's divide our land up into pieces and give the little nobles, smaller nobles, and so on, so forth and so forth. So you got
Yeah,
that.
essentially. And this is because of course uh centralization is a difficult problem when all you have is like horses and stuff. It actually gets a little bit better later on, but yeah. Um so William the Conqueror sets up various tiny little lords that can't by themselves compete with the King of France. I mean King of England.
Yeah.
Uh but if they all unite, and this is very important for Empress Matilda's grandson, John, who was never supposed to come to the throne. He was known as John Lackland because he
Yeah.
was so far down the pecking order, he didn't get any land.
Yeah, they divide the land between at this by him point England, Normandy, Anjou, and then then the land that Henry II's wife brought into the I forget what
Aquitaine.
Aquitaine
Aquitaine.
land too. So
Yeah.
like four different lands divided
And
between
Brittany.
all his kids.
Also Brittany.
Oh yeah, Brittany too.
Yeah. And also the Lordship of Ireland. But yeah.
I didn't know Ireland was conquered by this point.
They had it wasn't conquered, but they did have land over there, and they were given the title Lord of Ireland. So that's a very complicated story.
Good afternoon, Scott.
Yeah. Good afternoon. So Henry I, in order to get the nobles on his side, gives them some rights. John Lackland, though, comes along. He's very unpopular, as you can, because he's this is Robin Hood. Robin Hood, the myth of Robin Hood comes. Yeah, Robin Hood's around this time, and at this point, Philip Augustus of France, the monarchs of France, because of the way the feudal system worked in France, they didn't have much power at the beginning. All right.
Yeah, like I said, they gave the land the hope that the landowners would be loyal to them. Most of the time, they weren't. They're loyal to themselves more than the king.
Yeah, and they had given them big tracts of land, but Philip Augustus would see a renaissance in French power, essentially. And now John, who just so happens to be Duke of Aquitaine, I think he was Count Duke of Brittany, Duke of Normandy, Count of Anjou. He has all these lands in France, and there's a fight between Philip and him over, okay, you are going to be subservient to me because you own lands in France. Even though you're a king on your own, you have to pay homage to me for the lands you own in France. And John isn't having it, so Philip Augustus actually starts confiscating his land, and he has to go down and he has to fight for his land, essentially.
And they did a very good job at it.
No, he ends up losing. He's unpopular because of this. All of the barons come together and say, we're done with you. We want our rights back. You've been impinging on our rights. And this is actually when Magna Carta is established. Still not technically Parliament. Parliament is still a little bit later. More
But
under.
I would say it was kind of like maybe the prequel to it almost. The barons.
Yeah, the prequel to it.
Like the House of Lords, not the Commons, obviously, but the Lord House.
Parliament is more established under the adolescence of Henry III, who is John's son.
Yeah.
John dies unexpectedly in 1216 while he's trying to flee the barons because he's at war with them.
Yeah. Also, kind of in the future, his grandson or great grandson, I forget what it is, but almost had the same issue, but in reverse, when he decided that the Scottish people were his vassals, and they're like, "No, we're kings." Like, "No, you're my vassals." Like, they're like, "No."
Oh yeah, Edward the First, the grandson of John Lackland and the grandfather of Edward the Third. It was more he was trying to. He didn't want to have the threat of Scotland behind him while he's trying to ensure his holdings in France. So he more wanted to put on John Balliol as a loyal king who would be nice to England. But of course, the Scottish people didn't like that, and it became a whole mess. Braveheart, except Braveheart is not historically accurate. Not at all. The Battle of Stirling Bridge became a battle on open plain. Never mind.
Like I said, that's another podcast episode, but later in the future too.
Yeah.
This is why we have extra time set up, because we go on these tangents a lot.
Yeah, I made sure to put a family tree so that you guys could.
That's Edward III's kids.
Small. Well, no, it's from Henry. I think Henry the Third.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it goes Edward the First, Edward the Second.
Yeah, to make sure, because this is going to be, dynasties are a little confusing. But what's going to be important for the reign of Edward III's father is
next.
Edward II, is the Marcher Lords. I just want you to go back a little.
Oh, right.
The red spots, that's the English. Well, the Welsh marches. March means border. These lords had a lot of power because, of course, they're on the boundary between England and Wales.
And it was around this time that England fully incorporated Wales in their system.
Yeah, Edward the First conquered Wales, so these people had castles. They held a lot of power. Now you can go to the next one.
Right. Now it's not mentioned here, but Edward II's wife was the daughter of the King of France.
Yes, Isabella of France, and that's actually very important for later. Yes, it is. I made sure to put in from Braveheart. That's Edward II in Braveheart. He was a weak ruler, and he was easily influenced by the people around him, and he liked being around the people around him. He was some sort of LGBT because, he enjoyed the company of.
I wasn't sure if that was a rumor about him or it was a true thing or not.
It's difficult to ascertain. I think that he probably was, maybe. I don't know.
Or at least maybe bisexual at the most, at least maybe, because unless he just had sex with his wife just because it was required of him.
Yeah, maybe. But Piers Gaveston and then later Hugh Despenser, the younger.
Yeah.
So the problem is that when you have a close when you have a close inner circle, and and you're weak, you just lost a war in Scotland, and you and your wife don't get on very well. You guys don't like each other.
Yeah.
the barons and earls and all of that will get very upset with you and try to at least get those people out of power. This happens earlier with Piers Gaveston, and then you get the Dispenser War, which they're trying to get Hugh Dispenser out of the government. And one of the major people that does this, that leads this, is Roger Mortimer, the first Earl of March. He holds a lot of power, not only in the Welsh Marches, but in Ireland as well.
Now we're fast. Mortimer. That last name sounds like we talked about. I heard it before somewhere. Besides this here.
Yeah, I think that this family is actually pretty well entrenched. There were probably some in the Wars of the Roses.
Okay.
I think there was an Anne Mortimer, maybe,
Yeah.
in the Wars of the Roses.
Yeah.
But Roger Mortimer, he was one of the most powerful marcher lords. He had a lot of money. He gets imprisoned in the Tower of London. Isabella is angry. She goes to her dad in France. Was it her dad? I don't know. She goes to
either her dad or this time maybe her brother, one of her brothers.
Yeah, one of those. She goes down there to try and be like, "Hey, come help me against my husband because I don't like him very much." Roger ends up getting out of the Tower of London, fleeing to France, hooking up with Isabella, becoming lovers, and then they go back. In 1327, they come back. Edward II was deposed. They did horrible, horrible, horrible things to him, including sticking a hot spike in his to mock his assumed homosexuality. And Edward III, who was only 14 years old at this point, becomes monarch. And because of that,
well,
Roger...
Yeah, monarch by parents. I guess at the time he considered young enough to rule on his own, so he had to have supervision still.
Yeah, Roger Mortimer becomes the de facto monarch and all, but name during this time. So the next slide would probably be good.
All right. Right.
So Roger Mortimer is essentially the real power behind the throne at this point. And so the early part of Edward III's reign is going to be attempting to take the throne back. And part of this, Roger Mortimer essentially used his power to acquire estates and titles throughout England and Ireland, and probably set up his descendants pretty well. But this would end up, he wouldn't be there much longer. Edward of Woods,
until Edward III got of the age at least.
Yeah, he actually, I'm pretty sure back in the day, your seniority would actually be not too far after 14. So the fact that Roger kept control for as long as he did was kind of proof, that he wasn't in it for good intentions. The beginning of his downfall occurs in a war against Scotland. Okay. The battle is...
So, like the guy who replaced, he also did bad in Scotland.
Yes, he also did bad in Scotland. He lost the Battle of Stanhope Park and had to give up actual large amounts of territory in the north of England, which Edward was not a big fan of. And Edward is essentially trying at this point to find how am I going to do this? How am I going to take power? This is the first crack, and the second crack comes in 1330. The Battle of Stanhope Park is in 1327. But his wife, I think Philippa of Hainaut, right?
Yeah. Philip. I think Philippa sounds right. The last name I can't really pronounce that well.
They end up having Edward of Woodstock, who would eventually get the coolest name in English history,
The Black
the
Prince.
Black Prince. In 1330, he is born. Edward and a couple of his mates, his chums, go up to Nottingham Castle and capture Mortimer and execute him. So now Edward will be in power in his own name now. He also sidelines Isabella, I think.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
forget what he
Unlike
does
his,
with her.
yeah, but unlike Roger, I don't think he executes his mom either because he's royalty herself, and I guess he kind of likes his
Yeah.
mom, I guess. But the
Well,
stepfather, no, he's gone. He's dead.
I'm pretty sure Isabella pushes him pretty hard to try and conquer France later. Yeah, she dies in 1358, so she's around for a while.
Okay, but like I said, I guess yeah, but still, he doesn't probably unlike his stepfather, he's probably execute kill his own mother.
Yeah. So now he has to ensure that the instability that has happened not only under his father, but his grandfather, and past that, his great grandfather with the barons doesn't happen.
Yeah, and this
And that
picture
goes,
right here is him killing or capturing Roger.
yeah. So the next slide we'll get into his policies to try and so really quick, one of the things that got knocked into my head. There were two things that my professors at university wouldn't let me do. The one was call it, any group of people a tribe. He'd always say call them nation. And the second was do not synonymize nation and state. This is a rather modern concept. At the time, there was no idea. There was no idea of the nation state. Nation just meant a group of people who are culturally, linguistically, and historically related to each other. So you do get the beginnings of an English national identity, but you've got a couple of centuries down the line until you have the
like
English
in,
nation state.
like the 1800s after Napoleon stuff.
Yeah, Napoleon and the French Revolution, these are seen as the advent of the nation state.
Yeah,
So
but like
when I'm
again,
talking,
but that's a domino way down the line from this point.
yeah. So when I'm talking about this, don't think of this in the modern idea of a nation. This is just setting up an identity for them all to look at as he's going to start planning to move against France. So in so he used new peerages. Peerages is essentially, landed titles, earls, dukes. I don't no barons are a part of it. Yeah, so to consolidate the nobility around him, essentially, uh, give close confidants and people he grew up around, give them titles like earls and stuff. Earls would be above the baron, so and make sure that
But the dukes were for his kids or his brothers probably.
yeah,
The
there
duke,
were
the duke
no
is
dukes in
oh,
England before this point, but
the
he
only duke was
decides.
the king himself was a duke, but
Yeah. In France, there were dukes, but there were no dukes in France.
I think
I mean,
it's
not France.
because I'm guessing. I'm just guessing here is because under the dukes were the barons, and when the Duke of Normandy brought his barons up, he brought them up to the land up there. So that's why they were
Well,
barons up
yeah,
there.
this was part of William's plan to ensure that no one man could challenge for the throne. Don't have higher titles of nobility, because they usually would hold multiple earls underneath them and multiple barons underneath them that wouldn't be loyal to the king, but would be loyal to the duke. So that was part of that. However, Edward's plan was to make close relatives of the king into dukes. They will thus be loyal to the monarch, as what's good for the monarch is what's good for the family. That's his thinking. And to further ensure that the loyalty isn't towards the duke in a sense, and try to make sure that the loyalty is to the state and to the monarch, he creates the Order of the Garter, which is still used today. Um, uh, it's just like a club for the nobility, essentially. He actually thought about reviving the Knights of the Round Table as well. Well, quote unquote reviving, but he decided not to because he thought that it would be the way war was at the time was not seen as chivalrous, so he didn't want to have too much association with chivalry and his court. And he actually starts using he actually starts having literary languages not literary English used as a literary language and being used in the government. Now that does not mean that it was the dominant. They still use French or Anglo-Norman mostly, but you do start seeing his grandson will eventually be the first monarch to go out and talk to people in English.
Talk to the little people, the peasants.
Yeah, the peasants during the
So,
peasants'
but
revolt.
basically, the kings were more bilingual, a little bit more French, I guess, because that's the nobility language. But slowly started to go to more English at this point.
Yeah, because he's going to be gunning for the throne of France. So he's going to be at war with France, and he wants to set the English apart from the French people. This is the beginning of the English national identity. Is we aren't French, we're English, which is kind of weird, seeing as your nobility and your monarch are all descended from French people, but people don't really think that hard, especially when they're toiling fields and fighting in wars. So this is all for the next slide, because
Yeah.
he's going to be...
Everyone, more of this, go check out my last year's episode of languages I did with Dapper Dino. We kind of went to the English language history a little bit down there.
Oh, that actually reminds me. The lords of England would not be speaking French. They'd be speaking the dialect from Normandy.
So
That's
Norman,
why, yeah, Norman French, because there's some words that have come into English, like cavalry and stuff, that wouldn't make sense if it came from Parisian French,
yeah.
but it does make sense if it comes through Norman.
So kind of like Viking French almost.
Yeah, yeah. There's some
Since
of that.
since kind of
The
Normandy was originally like a reward for the Vikings to say you come here from history, you stay here and fight off your cousins up in Scandinavia. And
Yeah. Stop besieging Paris. Leave us alone. Yeah.
you're our border guards
So
now.
yeah. So Isabella, of course, is his mom, who is the grandson of Philip the Fourth.
Yeah, or the daughter of Philip the Fourth.
Yeah, yeah. What did I say? I'm
It's
sorry.
his son. It's the son of.
Oh, whoops. We live in the modern age. People can be moms can be sons at the same time. I don't know. So you throughout history you have this struggle between the fact that not only are the English monarchs in their own right,
Yeah.
but they also have to pay homage to the French monarch.
Mhm.
And a problem occurs when the last of the direct,
Yeah.
they're called the direct Capetians.
Yeah. The last
Um,
of the when all of Isabella's brothers died and they had no descendants of their own.
yeah, they're called the direct Capetians because they're direct descendants.
Yeah.
Uh, father, son, father, son, father, son, to Hugh Capet, the first Capetian king of France. So now you have this. You have this other
He's
the
like
House of Valois.
second or third, first, second, third cousin. I forget how
Yeah,
far back it went.
if you want to look at a confusing family tree, look at the family tree of the monarchs of France. It's
Yeah,
confusing.
I have a little list a long time ago, and on ancestry.com, I made a little list. Yeah, it's like
Yeah, it's incredibly confusing. But the Valois, Philip the Sixth, becomes the first Valois monarch. Yeah,
and
um,
Edward III's like, wait a minute, I'm more of a descendant than you are.
well, it more comes out of the fact that Philip the Sixth is coming to Edward and saying, if you don't pay me homage for Aquitaine and Ponthieu, which is that big, what color is that? Like a grayish yellow brown kind of thing. That's all. That's Edward the Third's land right there. If you don't pay me homage for that land, I'm gonna take it. So he goes and he takes it, and Edward the Third was not having it. He's like, my mom is the daughter of Philip the Fourth. I'm closer. I'm closer to him than you are. I'm gonna take the French throne, which
Yeah, now
Sigma move right there.
yeah, well here it's I've heard this point I've heard different stories about this that before this they may or may not they may have already had the you can't have female descendant line here, or it might have happened because of this.
So this comes to down to um. So the nobility of France does not want the King of England to be King of France. So technically, that rule was not a thing beforehand. The
Okay.
Capetians were not direct descendants of the Carolingians, and the Carolingians were not direct descendants of the Merovingians either. So, but the nobility of France and the Hundred Years' War is actually a very important thing when it comes to the national identity of both France and England in making them uh, distinct and separate nations. Um, the nobility was like, nah, I don't want to be a part of. I don't want to be. I don't want to have Edward the Third be my monarch. So they are the ones that decide. You know this law that comes all the way back in the 500s. The Salic Law says women can't inherit the throne, and
Yeah.
people through the women's line can't inherit the throne. Nah.
So that was a thing.
So
Not that because of this thing. Not like, oh, this has always been a thing. No, so you're saying this started because of this claim.
yeah, it started when they put Philip the Sixth in, but they put Philip the Sixth in because they didn't want Edward the Third, and Edward the Third was like, okay, it was a whole thing leading up to this, and so
But yeah,
you
the
get
Edward III didn't care that much until his land got taken away.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure Isabella actually urges him on to try to take the French throne, the motherly wants, I guess, and so there's the Hundred Years' War. That is a deceptive title, as with the Wars of the Roses. It's multiple different conflicts set into one.
like
The
Edward III
first,
and later Henry V and
uh,
VI.
oh yeah, this goes through multiple different monarchs. This goes through Edward III, Richard II, Henry IV, Henry V, Henry VI. 5 monarchs. Wait, did Edward the Fourth? Edward
I
the
think
Fourth might
maybe
even be
Edward the
fighting. I
Fourth.
don't know.
I think maybe, but I think Edward the Fourth was more concerned. Edward the Fourth. I mean, yeah, Henry the Fourth might have been more concerned about claiming his own throne in England with the Henry the Third than he was with France. Probably, I'm thinking maybe.
Yeah, the official end is 1453 of the Hundred Years' Wars. If I'm not, oh, wait, no, that might just be the fall of Constantinople. I gotta.
Yep, I think Constantinople fell like 1456 too. Yeah,
Yes, it was 1453.
yeah.
I was right. Nice. So going back to earlier with the whole problem with the Knights of the Round Table, the early combat in the war, Hundred Years' War, was these thing called chevauchés. These were just massive raiding parties that would go in and just absolutely destroy the countryside, rape, pillage, all of
Yeah,
that stuff.
and this is like I think it's an. Have you ever did you ever watch the? I don't know if it's accurate or not. Did you ever watch the extra credits or the 100 year war series?
No, I watched the Kings and Generals one.
Okay, that was pretty good. They had
Yeah.
this thing about how it was the English longbowmen versus the Knights of France, and
Oh yeah. There was also that led into the fact that he didn't want to have the Knights of the Round Table as well. This whole and the first time this really shows itself is at the Battle of Crécy, um, between Philip the Sixth and Edward the Third. They fight essentially, and the English longbowmen just absolutely destroy the knights. And this is like an early showing of how good ranged combat can be better than close combat if you're trained enough, and you start getting uh English peasantry being forced to train every single day, stuff like that, insane stuff. um yes, the wacky Plantagenets. Yeah, Edward the Third ultimately wasn't like his son was the big star of the war early on. Edward of Woodstock, the Black Prince, he led what was called the Grand Chevauchée, and if you watch the Kings and Generals video, he just absolutely wait. That was History Marsh, actually. History Marsh.
yeah, so many history channels
There's a,
now. Uh, don't end up you start.
yeah.
Yeah, there's better history channels now. History channels on YouTube than there's an actual history channel now on cable.
Oh man. Oh wait, are you telling me ancient aliens aren't real? Come on.
Well, might be real, but you can only talk about it so many times before it gets boring.
You can't tell me Puma Punku was made by people. But
yeah, between ancient aliens and the pawn shop stars, on History Channel.
yeah. But beforehand it was just like World War II the channel, but man, that's better than the pyramids were built by aliens, in my opinion. But yeah. So
Edward the Third's like, no, like, he says
yeah.
the map insert is revealing how easy it is for England monarch to think of themselves as French, but with British property.
Yeah, that kind of actually starts going away with Edward the Third. Because the slide earlier, it looks like you just the beginning of the national identity stuff.
Yeah.
But yes, it was definitely early on. The English monarchs definitely did think of themselves more as like French people that owned land in France. Famously, Richard the First only spent like a couple of weeks in England, and then he just left.
Because he was a crusader. Trying
Yeah,
to go
and
to Jerusalem to fight what was Saladin? Was it Saladin?
yeah, Salah ad-Din, yeah,
Saladin.
and he ended up dying in France, fighting, I think, against rebellious lords. But yes, during this entire thing, you have the Black Death, which is actually extremely important for later periods, and for what I think is actually far more important about Edward III's reign than the wars he was in or the things that he did with dukedoms. The power of the House of Commons, uh, the power of Parliament grows during this period because of it. Because you actually have a massive shortage in labor. A third of the country died. A couple of the royal family died. As kids, I think. Uh, yes, that's my headcanon now. um,
Now, sounds like this. Was the Black Prince inducted the Black Death or something else?
I don't think so. I think it had something to do with his armor.
Okay, I was wondering if that happened at the same time. Like, was he died? Was that because he died of the Black Death or something? Or
I I need to know now.
okay, I feel like
Yeah. I don't know. I can't find
okay.
it quick
I was
enough.
just wondering about that because Black Prince, Black Death names
It
match.
it might have something to do with the Grand Chevauchée, maybe. I'm not completely sure. But because of the shortage in labor and rise in wages, he had to essentially try to uh oh nice. I didn't know that
Yeah,
from James
this.
Downer.
You found something?
James Downer
Oh,
just but what were you gonna say? Sorry.
yeah. I think it was. I was this time since there were less peasants on the thing after the Black Death. They were this time they were like, hey, so there's less of us. Why don't you start paying us more for stuff
Yeah.
this was like at least in England at least it was the downfall of the serfdom and then more
I
not
mean,
necessarily
you still
downfall per se, but
it takes a little bit, but yes, it does ultimately do that. But in an attempt to try and solve this problem, he sets up the statute of laborers. And one of the interesting things I read was he essentially tried to legislate out supply and demand. So it was designed to fail. And it does fail after, I'm pretty sure it's what sets off the peasants' revolt. All right, I'll look that up. But so of course you're fighting a war during the Black Death. That's not very fun. Uh, but the next thing, taxation.
so this did 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 the Black Death end Edward III's part of the war, the 100-Year War?
No, I'm pretty sure they had. Um. So, 1 second. 100. because you have the first Edwardian phase, and then you have the Breton succession crisis. I can't remember. I mean, so the Edwardian phase is 1337 to 1360, which actually they're just chugging through
Okay.
the Black Death during this time. And then later on, you'd get the War of the Breton Succession.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I wasn't sure if that the Black Death ended his campaign. Then later on, his grandson, great grandson Henry V, picked it up later on.
Oh no. Yeah, no. This thing, the 100 Years' War, you have fighting throughout every single king after Edward III until Henry VI. Yeah, no one would let Emir play. Who cares if people are dying? They're
As long
gonna
as the
die
world is,
in war anyway.
yeah.
And it's not like medieval armies were that big anyway. They weren't that big. But yeah, taxation. This is where Parliament gets a lot of political power for a little bit, but they use this political power later on to essentially say to the Tudors, hey, you can work with us and you can bypass the nobility. But of course, if you're fighting a big war in France and if you're dealing with plague in the countryside, you need taxes. And Magna Carta had already set up the system during Henry III's reign that he had to call a parliament to establish taxation. There was a little bit of a struggle between Henry III and the lords about this, but Edward I is like, actually, this is a great way to get the nobles on my side, so that I can wield the entirety of the English state against Scotland and France and Wales. So the House of Commons started coming in, and because of this new expansion of powers, you get the creation of different procedures, the beginning of impeachment and the office of the Speaker of the Commons.
And would that be the later the prime minister became the prime minister later?
No, the Speaker is still. Have you ever watched
British
parliamentary
yeah,
stuff?
they are
You have.
they're more open to arguing than our system of government is.
Well, the Speaker is the guy that goes order, order. He's that guy. He essentially the same thing as the Speaker of the House here,
Okay.
except he doesn't hold as much political power.
Oh, then what's the prime minister then?
The Prime Minister, it's the Prime Minister comes from. So he is the leader of the. Okay. How am I going to explain this? Okay. So in Parliament, you have different parties. Okay.
Yes.
You have the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats. The Prime Minister is at first the person who can wield the most votes in his favor in the House of Commons.
Okay.
And now it's the leader of the party that has the most.
But this is not. This is different from the speaker than here, there,
Yeah.
back then.
Yeah. The first prime minister that is generally, the head of the majority party. I think they do actually have to be a member of parliament, though. They have to. I know early on you could be in the House of Lords and not in the House of Commons, but now I think with liberalization and stuff, it's essentially you have to be in the House of Commons and be an MP.
So
Um,
So probably no Whigs or Tories anymore. Whigs party anymore, or whatever that was back then.
well, the Whig Party is the ancestor of the modern liberal Democrats.
Okay.
The Labor Party became more important
Oh,
in the early 20th century, and the Conservatives are still called the Tories, but they're not the same Tories as beforehand.
so like
But
so kind of like how our party changed from the Federalist, anti-Federalist Republicans, all of them, to Whigs, to or now the English political system changed too throughout the years.
yeah, definitely. The Labor Party actually starts with Marx a Marxian sense of economics.
Yeah. Was
Essentially,
it was it during the Stuart reign that the prime minister came more of a power thing?
the first ever prime minister that is accepted by all English historians was oh my gosh, how am I going to forget his name? How am I going to forget his name? Why am I doing this? It was during the reign of of one of the Georges,
Okay, the Hanovers then.
the Hanoverians. Yeah. Why am I forgetting his name? No. Before that, the Chancellor of the Exchequer was Sir Robert Walpole.
Oh, I heard about Walpole before.
Yeah, Sir Robert Walpole is the first person that is seen as the very
And that was the beginning. That was at the end of the Stuarts, beginning of the Hanovers. During I again, you should watch this part on the history show. They talked about the
South Sea Bubble. Yeah,
yeah, that thing.
yeah, the South Sea Bubble, one of the first like capitalist economic crises. Yeah.
Want to buy
Um.
some stock in this thing that doesn't exist? It's
yeah. 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 No. Yeah. Yeah. But you do get the beginnings of the Tories and the Whigs. I think during the Stuarts, the Tories were the people who supported uh were the ones who supported the king, and the Whigs were the ones that didn't support the king. And that's actually why the Whig Party in American history gets its
yeah,
name, because they
like
always like
okay,
characterizing Andrew Jackson as a monarch.
yeah, like one side supported like the Cromwell Rebellion, and the other one didn't.
Uh, yeah, essentially.
And
It
maybe later
became
on, one side supported the Hanoverines because they were Protestant. The other side was like, no, no, James the Second's son still the Jacobites were more of a thing than the other people.
yeah, and it also came down to did you support the Glorious Revolution or not, or stuff like that. Yeah, exactly. Because I'm pretty sure it became a problem that uh some people didn't want to some prime ministers didn't want to take titles, because if they did, they couldn't be prime minister anymore. They could
Oh,
only be a member of cabinet.
because like the House of Lords, House of Commons division thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I don't know. They might have made it so that you can't be in the House of Lords and be in the cabinet anymore. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
and
Um,
and see, RJ, you said you'd have much to talk about here. Here you are, popping up in the chat a
yeah,
bunch of stuff.
yeah. The Whig Party in America got its name because they essentially were like, Andrew Jackson's gonna be a king, you know. We're gonna be anti Andrew Jackson, and that was essentially all that held the Whigs together, because
And
they all had different ideas on
and was the
slavery and stuff.
again, we're getting off topic of Edward III, but still, I think was the Whigs the beginning of the later on the early Republican Party under Abraham Lincoln. Was that the precursor to that, or is that different altogether?
Parts of it. Parts of it would join the Democrats. Yeah, I know. I know we're not. uh, but yes, the Whigs and the Know Nothing Party, they'd come together to become the Republicans, and that people talk about the party switch, but one thing that did not switch between the parties is that the Democrats have usually been, after the Civil War at least, pro immigration, while the Republicans are usually anti immigration. And that's because of the Know Nothing Party, which is also known as the American Party. They were essentially like, we don't like immigrants, so that's going to be
And
what our party
to
is
learn more
about.
about that, you can check out last year's episode of me and RJ talking about the political party system.
Although, if I'm wrong about any of that, please, RJ,
Yep,
let me know.
I'll have that up there in the cards up above somewhere. You can watch that video and click that card right there. All right, so have we got through this slide yet?
No, so you actually get increased political awareness amongst the people that were a part of Parliament and who would send the delegations to Parliament. And this is because the king had to prove the necessity of the taxes that he was raising, and that it would benefit the community, that not just the community as a whole, not just the communities as a whole in England, but their community. So some essentially movements towards what is today Parliament. And this is actually what I find to be some of the most important things that Edward III, while he's not directly a part of it, this is some of the most important social changes that were going on during this time. Yeah, the 100 Years' War is cool to talk about. The battles like Crécy and Poitiers, they're fun to talk about. Later on, Henry V's battles of Agincourt, they're fun to talk about.
But that's different.
But
That's a different episode in the future.
But my bread and butter is social history, and this is the beginnings of like Parliament and that social movement towards more political awareness, more political involvement from a new class that will become important, that will help. Yes, that would help the Tudors keep power, because if you're noticing, the way that Edward III has set up the kingdom is what's going to essentially set off the Wars of the Roses. And now the Tudors, when they come to power, not only do they have to find allies against the nobility in order to cement their reign, they go to this new landed gentry that's just underneath the barons and the aristocracy. These people who have been gaining power because of the Black Death and this increased role of Parliament. They go to them and the church for their power. So that's how we're able to that's how England is able to get out of this is how they're able to get out from the problems of the Wars of the Roses, essentially, and the problems of the nobility during the Tudors.
Yep. Increased awareness. Yeah.
Yeah, the Tudors. What Henry the Seventh, from what RJ is saying, Henry the Seventh was a very fiscally aware monarch. He essentially wanted to ensure that his lands that he owned, and one of the most important, yeah, they did lose a lot of power in the Black Death times. But the Duchy of Lancaster actually This is why it got merged back in with the English monarchs. The Duchy of Lancaster is an extremely wealthy land, and that was also the backbone of Tudor power. But again, we're going off on it on a different thing. I'm sorry,
Like so,
but
we do on this show. You have a topic that's the thing about history too. Everything's connected somehow. It's all domino branched off each other until this big web of mess we call history.
yeah, exactly. It's part of what I like about it, but
It
the
it,
Ed,
it, it ain't as it ain't as history isn't as what's the word nice and tidy like math is, or maybe even some science. I guess science is kind of nitty too, but
yeah, it is not. Once you get into it, it's like it's really hard to talk about, and that's probably something I need to get better at. It's hard to focus down on what you're trying to talk about because it all ends up going somewhere else.
yeah, that's why what ifs are kind of hard to do because so many branching parts of that other history that develop each other. It's hard to pick out what one thing changing will affect something else down the line because so many different layers of stuff.
Yeah, there are some people that do what ifs in a way that I don't like. What ifs are only good for understanding why things happened the way they were, and they're fun too. But some people just want to be like, what if the Nazis won? Some dumb stuff like that. I don't know. And Alternate History Hub is actually really good about that. He says that
Yeah.
it's more important that we know why things happen, and these thought
Yeah.
experiments kind of help with that.
Yeah, and he also what's that too? Because he also says the further back you go, the harder it is to pinpoint things. Other stuff happens too.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like
because the butterfly effect. So the political order that Edward III set up in his later reign starts to. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, it starts to immediately break down as he gets older. The nobility that used to be his backbone, that allowed him to project so much power into France, they're dying, and now we have a new nobility that is more loyal to the princes, creating essentially infighting between the nobility. So already the stuff that he tried to do in order to try to fix the problems with English feudalism or feudalism in general, they're already falling apart by the end of his reign. And he starts listening to more confidants. You know how Edward II ends up falling because of his confidants. He has a mistress, I forget her name, but she becomes extremely powerful. And this is also where Parliament gets a little bit of its power as well, because in 1376 they came to accept taxes, but instead they just sat there and were like, we don't like this, we don't like this, we don't like this. The king's favorites were removed from power, and this is one of the first showings of that impeachment power that Parliament had been gaining because of the increased need for taxation and the Black Death.
yeah, I
The
guess
hundred,
was also was maybe Edward III distracted with his war in France too. So maybe either he let the people Parliament get English power, or he didn't notice it. He was getting the power.
a new king in France comes up, and this begins the Caroline phase of the war, and you start getting setbacks, and a lot of the land that Edward III controlled before the war, he's now losing that land, and he's losing what he's gained from these wars. And he he lived so long he outlives his own son, the Black Prince,
by a year.
by a year. Yeah. Then he dies in 1377, and now the throne passes on to Richard II. I can't remember if he's a kid when he
Yeah, I think he
gets.
was 12.
Yeah.
I think we
So
talked about that. I think we talked about that in the War of the Roses.
yes,
He
because it is really important, because whenever you have a strong nobility and a weak monarch, it's not very good when it comes down to the power of the monarch is going to be able to levy. Henry III was lucky that he had an amazing son in Edward I.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Henry the Third was also one of the started young too. He also became the king when he was young too.
yeah. Um, uh,
I think that's one of the reasons that people like, even though you don't think he's that great, that some people like Edward the Third because he was one of the few. I think he was one of the few exceptions that started became a young king and still got stronger, I
and
guess,
yeah,
instead of weaker.
yeah. He actually died an extremely popular king. Uh, that earlier problem with Parliament wasn't saying this is Edward III's fault. This is his close confidant's fault. They're the ones that are doing this to the kingdom, not Edward, because they loved Edward.
Mhm.
I don't. But yeah, he was a pretty impulsive person, and I think that would lead to a lot of problems with his system failing, because he's trying to get it all set up in time. He's not king for that long before he starts with his war in France, and from that point on, it's almost constant war. You are dealing with the Black Death, and ultimately giving your giving your sons duchies, which now have power over multiple earls, which now has it essentially leads to the problems that come up during Richard II's reign, and why he eventually gets overthrown by Henry Bolingbroke
Yeah.
and the beginning of the House of Lancaster.
Yeah, if you want to hear more about that, right up here, if you point the right direction, I'll have the card up for the War of the Roses episode.
So while in the short term, it gave him the necessary political capital in order to go to war with France, it ends up coming to bite his descendants in the ass, essentially.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I cuss? Oh no.
Yeah, I don't have that. I'm not monetized, so feel free.
Yeah, so having so essentially that's my main problem with Edward III. Well, yes, exactly. RJ, right here. Yes, that is the biggest flaw with monarchy, and it's a flaw that continues to be a problem with England throughout uh, its time, especially the Stuarts. The Stuarts, one of the worst dynasties in my opinion that ever
That's
ruled.
me.
Oh no, just because they wanted to be absolute rulers, but the English people, they were like,
At the time, this
not,
maybe if this was still France, I could do that. But by this point, England was like no, we've moved beyond that at this point.
Yeah, we're just gonna chop your head off, dude. Like, stop it. But yeah, the statute.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe plus the Catholic thing might have thing to deal with too.
Uh, yeah, secret Catholics,
Well, at least until they became open Catholics.
until James II. Yeah,
Yeah.
Charles I was a suspected Catholic. Charles II was baptized as a Catholic on his deathbed.
Yeah,
I think
that was
that's
the thing. That was
allegedly.
the thing that I read about that James the first slash six did. That
Yeah.
he married his son to a Catholic monarch, and he married his daughter to a Protestant monarch, or Protestant ruler, not monarch, but to have both feet in the party, both feet in the swamp.
Yeah.
Like his daughter became married to the later on the the elector of Palestine or
The Palatinate.
Palatinate, and that later became the Hanover ancestor, and then his son became married Henrietta, and that was the Catholic side.
Uh, yeah. And then, yeah, that statute of laborers, of course, fails because you're trying to legislate out supply and demand, which is like impossible. And the peasants weren't very happy. And again, the increased power of parliament. And in order for a king to be a great king, in my opinion, you have to have a good legacy. Monarchs like Alfred the Great, they're great because they set up a legacy that lasted for a long time and did good things for the people. Most of the legacy of Edward III actually ends in failure, and the biggest thing, in my opinion, that happens. This is my opinion on the Parliament thing being the greatest thing. It isn't even him. Isn't even his active doing. It was just the necessity of the time, and more of a what would that be called? Oh man, I'm sorry. I've been up since 2 a.m. I'm sorry. Words don't come very good to me right now. But yeah, uh, he didn't actively do it. It was just a consequence. There, it was a consequence of his actions. So the fact that the Wars of the Roses happened right after him, he wasn't that bad of a monarch. He was pretty good. He was a good general, but greatest, one of the greatest. No, I'm sorry. No, not for me.
So who is your greatest uh, English ruler then?
It's really tough. It's really tough, but I think it comes down to Alfred the Great.
Uh like technically Edward the Third's ancestor.
Yeah. But Alfred the Great, essentially, he wasn't even actually a king of England. He was,
Wessex, but yeah, but his descendants later became the English.
but the thing, his policies ensured that England would be what it is
Yeah,
throughout the Anglo-Saxon
yeah.
period.
I think it's direct descendant between Alfred the Great and Edward the Confessor. It was a direct line almost.
I don't think Edward the Confessor had kids.
And but I mean, but
Oh
no.
yeah. Oh, okay, I'm sorry, but yeah, but yeah,
I,
I don't know. It just got me livid when someone said, "Oh, he's one of the greatest monarchs in English history." No. But I don't normally rank monarchs. I don't actually think it's. I mean, it can be a little fun, but
like yeah, that's a good idea for a future episode. Tier chart of all the monarchs of Europe.
yeah, tier
S
charts
rank to F
are
rank.
way easier. They're way easier than ranking them because it's always like, oh my god, how am I gonna decide between these two people who are extremely similar? Where am I gonna put them? Because John Lackland, Edward II, Richard II. Where am I gonna put? How am I gonna differentiate these people? They all had the same
Louis the
problems.
14th, Louis the 16th. The guy got his head chopped off.
Oh, Louis XIV. He's one of the better French monarchs. But Philip Augustus, he's the one for me. I'm sorry.
Augustus.
If you're not counting Charlemagne, of course.
Oh yeah, yeah. Again, that's another topic altogether. Like how back then, instead Charlemagne, instead of like giving all your stuff to your oldest kids, like let's divide up between all our kids.
Oh yeah, Frankish succession. Oh my goodness
and
me.
thus began and thus began the rivalry between France and Germany that lasted to World War II.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you have the Holy Roman Empire and France feuding for a while too. They didn't like each other either. And that's the predecessor of kind of the predecessor of Germany.
Yeah, like I said, history is complicated among a web of webs and layers among each other.
Yeah, especially with what I said earlier, like the idea of the nation state wasn't a thing back then. What was Germany really except for this land that
Yeah,
uh
what they say the Holy Roman Empire was not holy Roman or an empire.
okay,
That's
during
the saying.
Voltaire's time, definitely.
Yeah,
Otto the First, Holy Roman Empire is all arguably two, possibly three, all three.
yeah, yeah. But even by the time of Charles V, that's kind of more of a not that great. It's more of a
Yeah, it's another. Unlike England, it actually has very similar problems to England in the fact that massive decentralization occurs because you keep giving lands to more and more sons because of that partition succession. So you get more and more lords who are more and more invested in their own lands, and then you actually get these interesting creations of cities that do not want to deal with the emperor, and they just want to do their own thing.
and by this point, it's more of a lip service than actual honor, like
Yeah,
title.
yeah. The
But
English were able to get past that, but the Holy Roman emperors weren't.
and
Um,
that's probably later on why it fell after Napoleon. Later on, became then Prussia took up the reins, and
I think that would be like that's like an interesting question. Why did the Holy Roman Empire fail, but England? It could be just because smaller landmass. I don't know.
like I said,
Someone write a book.
that's a topic for that's a topic for another episode. All right. So what have we learned today?
Edward III is not one of the greatest monarchs in English history, but a lot of important things happened. He's one of those monarchs that you just have to talk about. Edward I, great monarch, but you don't have to talk about him when it comes to the future. But Edward III, I think it's mostly because the 100 Years' War happens. A lot
Yeah,
of stuff can be tied back to him for
yeah,
later stuff.
yeah.
That's why.
Like some presidents, they might have been important in their time, but later on in history, no one really cares about them that much.
Yeah, yeah.
Like they might have been.
Edward I is mostly known from Braveheart, Longshanks. The the mean guy.
Yeah,
But he's a, and then you have other ones like William the Conqueror. These I don't know. They're just super important. All of the history after them like expands out and all the history before them, but they're super important. Just don't be like John Lackland, who's super important for all the wrong reasons.
yeah, yeah. So, for a future episode, is there any mark you want to talk about in the future of England or France or other ones you want to talk about? That
I'd be totally down with doing an entire like deep dive on the entire English royalty. Although I will not talk about Edward the Sixth because he wasn't alive long enough.
Edward this. Edward the
He was
Sixth.
one of the princes in the tower.
Edward the Fifth.
Edward the Fifth. Oh my God, so many. Yeah, Edward the Fifth. I will not talk about him.
I think you talked about a little bit in the War of the Roses episode where he's like, his uncle said he was technically a king because his mommy was illegitimate or something like that. The marriage was illegitimate.
Yeah, the marriage was illegitimate.
But then later, Henry the Seventh reinstated him because he's the sister, he's the brother of his wife. So like,
yeah,
so like, my wife is legitimate. So
my wife is legitimate. So Edward the Fifth is legitimate. But yeah, I'd like to. I'd be fine with deep dives on all of.
Yeah.
The monarchs.
That'd be a long episode if we do the entire thing from. Like,
oh yeah, I was more talking about each one a different episode.
Okay, okay. I think about all the way from Alfred the Great to Elizabeth II.
yeah, every single one, and then we get to talk about Prince Andrew.
Oh yeah. What's the future monarch's name? The little babe. He's like maybe 5 or 6 now.
I don't remember what his name is, but I was more talking about the Duke of York. He's currently in a lot of.
Oh, I was talking about whatever Prince William's kid's name is. His 3 kids.
Okay.
I know Charlotte's his daughter.
Prince William. His
that reminds me now.
George.
Yeah, that reminds me now. They changed. They currently, I think they recently changed the law. Instead of the first son becoming monarch, it's now whoever was born first, daughter or son, instead of boys then girls.
Oh yeah, I thought you were talking about like seniority succession. No, yeah,
it is now. Now it's whoever was born first in the thing, instead of boys first, then the girls next.
Yeah, agnatic, cognatic primogeniture.
That's another thing that England had over France later on, especially with the Edward III thing, is even though England might not have liked female rulers, they had no problem going through the female line to get their kings.
Yeah. And they did that a lot. But also, the Windsors will continue. They are not going to be called Mountbattens. They will continue to be Windsors. Because for some reason this time the female's name is going to be the name of the monarch.
Yeah.
After.
And technically, they became Windsors because of World War One, and they before that they were some German Saxe-Coburg novel.
Saxe-Coburg und Gotha.
Yeah.
Gotha.
Because of Victoria's husband's name.
Alfred. Yeah.
All right, so, but in particular, is there any English monarch you want to focus on our next meeting, whatever that might be?
Henry VII would be a good one.
I like that. That'd be cool. War of the Roses, Edward III prequel, Henry VII the sequel.
Yeah, exactly. And the rise of a new aristocracy.
Because Henry VII is the ancestor of the Tudors and the Stuarts too, because his daughter married James IV.
Yeah.
And then the 9 also the ancestor of the 9-day queen.
Oh yeah, Lady Jane Grey. Poor lady. All
right, well, again, thanks for only an hour and a half. Not bad.
Yeah.
We'll set up a time for that. Thanks for being on.
Of course.
Right. Any more comments? you were that were late to the thing, comment down below in the thing. Give us a thumb up. I say subscribe to him, but you don't have his own channel. I don't think.
No, but I do actually want to talk about one thing. The Tongan eruption. I think it's important that we do everything we can to help the people of Tonga and Vanuatu. That big eruption that just happened caused a massive amount of destruction. I know there are some channels doing some uh, there's a geology and science hub or something like that that has a video on it, and he linked it to a charity that is going to be helping the people of Tonga in this bad time, and talks about some of the stuff that's really bad about that. But I hope anybody who watches this from Tonga, I hope you guys are okay, and I hope Tonga turns out fine.
Me too. But until we meet again, never stop learning. Enjoy the randomness. I'll see you next time. Out.